Well, welcome everyone. I'm going to keep you awake after lunch, and we are going to talk about something very, very important, especially in this profession, about being true to who we are and what that journey has looked like for me and for others, and also what you can do to really brainstorm these ideas for yourself. So this is going to be somewhat interactive because you've got pads of paper and pens at your table. You are gonna take some notes as we go through this. I'm gonna ask you some questions so that you're thinking through this for yourself. But just to begin, I wanted to talk about the B3 method. So my book is called Business, Balance, and Bliss. And I created this journey based on my own career journey and what I look at as a methodology to really help us find happiness in our everyday lives. So the first part of this is business. And those are the stressors that we have to achieve our career aspirations, to be able to keep up with the stressors between life and work and all of the things that we encounter each day. The one part of my bio that you didn't hear is I'm a yoga instructor. I've owned multiple yoga studios. So I have incorporated a lot of philosophy that I have learned over the years, and I'll talk about that as part of my journey into this methodology that we're going to talk about today. So that's the second piece, and that's balance. And so we have what I call a human toolbox that comes naturally to us of mindfulness and collaboration techniques that we need to practice. So we know we have them, but just like regular exercise or anything else that you do of becoming an expert in the things that you do in your profession, it takes practice. So what I want you to think about today are different tools that I might talk about that you might think, you know what, I want to take that back and practice that myself. Because in order to make it a habit, we have to do it over and over and over again. So we're going to take those stressors, and then we've got the offset of our mindfulness and collaboration in order to create bliss. And bliss is the maintenance of happiness. I am using this term, it actually has a Sanskrit word, which is Satchinanda. And what that word means is that we exist. So a lot of times we forget that we exist, that all day long the day is coming at us, and we often don't slow down, just observe how we're feeling and making sure we're being really intentional about that day. And are we creating the joy in ourselves? So what we don't want to do is look outside for that joy. That's what talk is about today, that a lot of times what we're doing is looking for happiness everywhere else except right within ourselves. So we're going to talk about tools that you can do so that you can come back to that energy, that feeling that you want to create in your body so that you can maintain that happiness each day. And so what this all comes down to is how we create this balance in our lives between who we are and what our career aspirations are. Or what are the expectations of us in the workplace? And do those two things align? Or do sometimes we feel off? And I call this Groundhog Day because a lot of times we get the same feedback. We get the same feedback from our peers. We get the same feedback from our managers. And what we do is blame the outside world instead of pausing and saying, I've heard this before. So rather than blaming someone else, what can I do to shift my thought? And the biggest thing that when we go through this process is that we're not judging ourselves, because what happens a lot is we get really hard on ourselves when we get feedback and we see this repetition. And the thing is, we cannot run away from ourselves. We are in this body. So what is important is observing this feedback and really thinking about what are the things that we can shift so that we're not feeling this way anymore. Other people are not feeling the way that we're actually creating in this environment around us. So let's start off and talk about our beliefs. And this was a big journey for me because a lot of times we don't step back and think about how we've even come to the beliefs that we have. And they happen like this. We size up a stranger, someone that we just meet, or a coworker, or a boss, and immediately have an opinion without even meaning to. But often we don't pause and really observe, is that how I really feel? Or is that something that's ingrained in me to feel that way? Someone else might have put those messages in my mind without even realizing it. And those ingrained beliefs can come from so many different sources. But what's important is that we start thinking about, are they our beliefs or are they somebody else's beliefs? And a lot of times we start this career track that we're on, or we start any journey that we're on personally or in our work life, and we just do it. We're just putting our heads down and we're just churning through every single day. But often we don't step back and even ask, is this right? Am I doing what is aligned with myself? And that's when we get to the point where we want to break free from beliefs that are not our own. And how we know that they are not our own is that we actually question. And so questioning our beliefs when they come up in our head is just a process of observation. It's research. So it's not judging that something that we think is wrong or right, because we might find, yes, we are aligned with that belief, or maybe we aren't aligned with that belief. So what do we do about that? What's the journey to get there? And we don't think about what causes those beliefs to happen with us. But one thing we do know is we feel it in our bodies when it's not aligned. So oftentimes we'll say, I feel it in my gut. But that's actually our intuition. But we push down our intuition because we have a belief system that tells us otherwise. That for whatever reason, that belief system became a part of us, and we keep telling ourselves, that's something I can't have, or that's something I can't do, or that's something I can't be, because of those long-time beliefs that have been in our system. So I'll tell you a story in my journey to really help you brainstorm your own. But my belief system was that I needed to play things safe in my life. And I'll tell you why. So my mom owned maid services from the time I was in second grade till about high school. And she owned multiple businesses. And during this time, I started working as a really young girl in her office, and I got really involved. I loved all the things that she was doing. And at the same time, I also played violin and viola, I painted. I was a very creative person. So I was living in these two worlds. Well, when I was 16 years old, my mom's business had grown past residential home cleaning. So it had grown into construction cleanup and commercial cleanup and smoke restoration. So she was getting these really big jobs to go in and come in after the fact. So she wasn't a CPA, she wasn't an accountant, and she didn't know how construction loans worked. And she was very used to residential home cleaning, where you got paid at time of service. So when the savings and loan crisis hit, for those of you that were around at that time, everything crashed, which meant that so did all those construction loans that were owed to her for these big jobs that she went in. And she had a choice to make. The choice was, do I pay my employees or do I pay my payroll taxes? So guess what she chose? Her employees. So our family lost everything because the IRS was after her for all those back taxes that she couldn't pay. We lost our house, we lost everything inside of our house, and I quickly changed gears in my head. So I heard about my grandfather being a CPA. He was a CPA in the 1930s. I heard it was a very safe and secure career. And guess what? That's what I was gonna do after going through something like this. I never wanted to put my family through something like that or go through the fear of losing everything that you have. So that playing it safe really started driving everything that I was doing. And I went into this career with my head down and just started driving to it and became a partner in a CPA firm pretty early on at 32 years old. And at that moment, really started deciding something feels off, and I don't know why it feels off. And it was the fact that I was playing it safe based on these belief systems that I'd been told and that I saw in the world, when I had some passions outside of what I was doing that I had pushed away and I had pushed aside, and I wasn't taking risks that I needed to do. So in all of this journey, I had to step back and observe what's off. This is the hard part. This is the really hard part. Because when we feel off, and we have those moments of feeling off, the first thing that we want to do is run away. We want to quit everything. We want to run away. It must be somebody else's fault that we feel this way, rather than sitting in the muck and working through it and just observing what is happening in our lives. So I'm going to put on the first survey question, and what I want you to think about here, and it should come up on your phone or your computer, is when I told you that story, or when you're thinking of a belief system that you have, what came up for you? What's a belief that you have in your own life that you find that you follow and you're not sure? Was it a parent that put it there? Was it someone that you worked for that put it there? What is it that created that belief system internally for you? So my parents, my upbringing, family, you're not smart enough, my mom, time in nature, former bosses, my father, work hard, and ... church, mother-in-law, family bankruptcy, my dad, my mom, my faith. Isn't it interesting when we step back and think about these things, how our belief systems get created, right? And it doesn't mean they're wrong beliefs, but it's really important to observe where our beliefs come from and actually observe, do they align with who I am? And so as you think about this question, what I want you to think about is, how did it change you once you moved into adulthood? Because when we go into our careers and our profession, we start shifting from our childhood and kind of exploring whatever we're going to explore if we were allowed to, and starting to put on our masks, and I don't mean COVID masks, I mean actual masks of what we think is appropriate in the workplace. So when I started in the accounting profession, and I'm probably dating myself, but those of you that are my age know, there was these unwritten rules of navy suits, how long your skirt could be. I was constantly being told what was appropriate or not appropriate. It was a very different world that we live in today. And a lot of times when we look to others to see what is appropriate, that starts affecting our belief system. And then we tell somebody else that as well. We start mimicking whatever those things are, even if they actually were not aligned with who we are as a person. And so the other thing that happened to me in my journey was also when I was in accounting, you didn't really talk about who you were as a person. It was very important to have this impression, of what a CPA should be. So when I started yoga in my early 30s, I didn't tell anybody. And I went to Costa Rica to get my certification, and I remember being in the airport, calling my mother to tell her that I got my certification, and she said, "You're not going to tell anyone about that, right?" And for the first time, that was kind of a moment where I stepped back and I'm like, I am just as proud of this as my CPA certificate. It was the first thing I ever did for myself and not for somebody else. Not to make someone proud, but something that I needed to do just for myself. But I still didn't tell anybody. So I kept it to myself. I started teaching yoga. And then I'm teaching a yoga class, and one of my clients walks into the yoga class. And they're like, "You're the teacher?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then the other practitioners are listening to the conversation, and she's talking about something that has to do with their business. And they're like, "Wait, you're a CPA?" They only knew me as the yoga instructor. And then all this conversation started happening in the room. My brother's a CPA, my husband's a CPA. We've started having all these similarities. And then I started bonding with this client because we didn't know we both were into yoga. And I started realizing it's really important to allow people to see the other side of you. That you actually bond more when you are more human with others. And it does help you in business. So when we are going through this journey, it is really important that we are ourselves, that there is no one else that can be you. And that is a positive. So a lot of times when we're looking to see who we want to be, we start looking to others and trying to copy that. But when we are copying it, we don't come off authentic. That people know that we are not that person. And it doesn't align with who we are. So I like to kind of talk about it like being a quilt. That there are pieces of me that are a bunch of different people. That over time I've kind of grabbed this or that over time and made it my own. That it's really important to figure out what aligns with you versus just trying to be what you think somebody else is to get to that spot. Because as you become yourself, more people want to be around you and more people want to elevate that in the organization. So I think a great way to get back to that is finding a hobby. Now, I run client advisory services workshops all the time, and my first question to all of them is, what is your hobby? Do you know what at least half of them say? Work. Yes, all of that. Everything you just said. That's not a hobby. So it is important that we model to everybody in the firm that there is a life outside of work. A firm, corporation, wherever you work. That we start getting back to who we are authentically. So going back to my story, I gave up all of those things in my childhood because I started focusing on this career and I started being an expert in what I was doing. And I left those passions behind. You start feeling it. You start missing it without realizing what's missing. So I'm going to ask you a question that I'd like you to answer. When you were a child, what hobby or activity, doesn't have to be a hobby, what brought you happiness? What's the first thing that comes to your mind without thinking too hard? So playing sports, being outside, riding my bike, piano, puzzles, video games, playing chess, arts and crafts, doing crafts, coloring, roller skating, being outside. Look at how fast these come up. Dance, music, basketball, going to the park, playing sports. What I want you to capture right now is when you thought of that, it created an energy in your body. That's bliss. So when we're trying to get to that feeling each day, we have to know what we're trying to get to. That uncovered what that feeling was for you. So now we know, how do we work there each day? How do we get to that feeling where we have a complete release? When I'm playing outside with my friends on the street, that's a release, right? I'm releasing my brain. I'm getting back to who I am. And so it's important for us to figure out, how do we incorporate those things that are authentically us, either into our life outside of work or within the work that we do. So, like you heard, I am a podcast host called Breaking Beliefs. And this was one of my interviews with Jeff Thompson. He was the CEO of IMA. And he gave a great interview because what he talked about was doing something that makes you uncomfortable, that you know you have to work on in your life. And so what he talked about was how brutally shy he was as a child growing up. And he knew if he was going to be a leader, somehow he had to break out of that shyness. So he observed who he was. He had gotten the feedback of who he was, but that wasn't necessarily how he wanted to show up. So what did he do? He got a degree in education and was a middle school teacher for 12 and 13-year-olds to really break himself out of this shyness. I mean, there's nothing more brutal than being in front of middle schoolers every single day and being tested on this, right? So this was something that he could actually test himself, get comfortable so that he could work out of that. And that is playing with our fear and uncertainty when we're uncomfortable. So we have some traits that come up when we're fearful of change, when we're fearful of allowing ourselves to come out. And that is that we might stick our heels in the sand and just say, I'm not going to change. This is just who I am, and that's fine. Just observe that, as well as procrastinating or doing other things to talk against something because we're not comfortable with it. Every human has these tendencies. But what we also have is the opportunity of play and delight. And actually stepping back and saying, you know what, this is uncomfortable. How do I play with this? How do I not judge myself during this process? And why this becomes so important is that when we're going through these things, we learn about ourselves of how we learn, how we go through a process. And when we get in a position of management or leadership or helping others, we are more understanding, we are more nurturing of the learning process that they are going through as well. It starts with us. If we don't model it, if we don't change it ourselves, then we can't help others as well. So with my journey, I had a perfect storm. So like I said, I was a partner in a CPA firm, and I had had my second son, and during that pregnancy, I got really sick. And I ended up with a thyroid issue after pregnancy. And so the doctor told me the only thing I was allowed to do was yoga. And as a type A personality, that was not an answer I wanted. So I was used to boot camps, I was used to hardcore workouts. I happen to like working out, some people don't. So I was in my mind like, how am I gonna do this? And I went to yoga, and it broke me down. And I can tell you, as a yoga studio owner, people are more afraid of yoga than CrossFit. Because to be on the mat and to be alone with ourselves and to be alone in our minds takes courage. And allow ourselves to feel what is on the inside. And yoga doesn't have to be the thing for you, but whatever it is that you can actually pause and give yourself space to be silent. That's really scary, right? It's scary to even think about that, but that silence, that observation brings up things that we don't even realize that's in there. So not only was I doing yoga that really wasn't accepted by my mom, by my profession, I also started going to a therapist at this time, which really wasn't accepted in my family. It was only for weak people that went to a therapist. So I had this perfect storm of really opening up these emotions and allowing myself to go through the journey. And one of the things that was really important about that journey was realizing what are the things that I love about my life, and what are the gaps or opportunities that I want to change, that I want to pivot, not run away from, but pivot. And I realized as an accountant, I loved what I had years and years of thousands of hours of expertise. So what I didn't want to do is give that all up. But what I did need to do was shift. And so one of the ways we do this is learning how to align with our personal purpose. So this is where I need you to take a notepad, a piece of paper, and I want you to start writing this down for yourself. And really think about, what is my personal purpose? What is the value that I want to create in this world? So it's the value I want to create and who I'm creating it for in order to get an outcome. So going back to my story, my personal purpose statement was, I never want a small business owner to ever go through what my family went through. I want their business to thrive so that the people that come into their business are able to benefit from the services that they have to offer. It isn't my actual job, it's my purpose, right? My purpose could be my family. My purpose could be multiple different things in my life. But if I am out of alignment with that purpose, then I start feeling that feeling in my gut, something's off. And I keep pushing it down instead of stepping back and saying, am I in alignment with my personal purpose? Is there anyone that would like to share what they wrote down? Please share what you wrote down. Anyone want to raise their hand? Yes.
Providing educational arts opportunities for young children.
Providing educational arts opportunities for young children. Very good. What else? Who else would like to share? Yes.
Being able to put together some sort of awareness program around addiction within accounting firms.
Love that. Awareness program around addiction in accounting firms. Very nice. What else? Someone from the back of the room. Anyone want to volunteer? I choose you. All right, I'll let you not go, but here what I'd like you to do is go into the conference tool and answer the question, how can you utilize your personal purpose statement? So this is really important, is thinking about how I go to use this and use it with the people around me. So it's important to understand what other people's personal purpose is, if we're actually going to help everyone be happy in the organizations that we're working in, but also what makes me happy to make sure that I am in alignment in my career and the work that I do. So focus efforts, decisions, be brave, motivation to drive decisions, be a mentor, to empower, be confident, and empower others. Empathy, to grow my staff and myself. Not sure. That's okay. That's okay. Keep thinking. Keep me focused to take actions, to help me be more self-aware, to align what I'm doing with who I am to grow. So this is your first step. And it's really important we know what that is, and if we don't know right now, that's your homework. That's your homework to take away from this and keep thinking about it. Because this is where it helps aligns you in your work environment. And that's when we talk about personal brand. So a lot of times we allow our brand to be determined by others, rather than being intentional about the brand that we create in the organizations that we're in. So going back to your conference tool, how do you think your personal brand is viewed at work? And that's by others, not yourself. Outgoing, motivated, optional. I am the tech guru, positive, appreciated, game changer, respected, kind, positive, always busy, dependable, valued, cup half full, advocate, audit mom, organized process queen, welcoming. So these are how other people view us. Now what's important is determine, is that how we want them to view us? Is that authentic to who we are? So we have a problem in the world because everybody's perception is different. Our perception becomes our truth, but it's not necessarily the reality. And so we may feel we're coming off a certain way, but others might not feel the same thing. So I think a couple people said, I don't know. And that's a really good question to ask. It is important to know how other people are feeling your energy in the organization, and is it the way that you want people to feel in the organization? And I'll tell you, what gets in the way for all of us is the ego. And the ego is truly what creates our unhappiness many times. Because we get this vision of who we are and who we should be. And if that's not going our way, or we don't feel appreciated the way we think we should be appreciated, whether that's by our coworkers, whether that's by our boss, whether that's by our clients, then we start getting really unhappy. And we start getting mad at those people, rather than stepping back and saying, how can I release this image of myself? How can I release that so that I have a better understanding of how I'm affecting the world and begin to shift that? So there's a great book that talks about this, and it's called Leadership and Self-Deception. And there's a story in it that I think is just an easy one for us all to kind of understand the emotion around this, because we really betray ourselves a lot. That a lot of times in the workplace, we know the right thing to do, we know the right thing to say, but we just don't feel like it. Or we just don't want to, right? And then we start pointing fingers at others or having an attitude about others because we don't want to have to do the work to fix it, to have the conversation, to train the person, because we don't have the time. And so in this book, they used a really easy story for us to think about when we think about self-betrayal. And it was about new parents with a newborn. And the father was still going to work every day, and the mother was staying home. And she was getting up every couple hours with this baby, and that was going on for weeks. Well, one night, the baby starts crying, and she doesn't wake up. She's exhausted. So the father wakes up, and he looks over at her, and he's like, oh, she's been getting up every couple hours. I feel so bad for her. I should get up this time. And then he laid there. He's like, well, if I get up, it's going to take like a half an hour to get everything ready and then feed the baby, and then I'm going to have to get back ready to bed, and then this could be like an hour and a half by the time I get back to bed, and I may not fall asleep, and then I'm going to go to work tomorrow and I'm going to feel really tired. Why hasn't she woken up yet? How could she still be sleeping through this? This baby is so loud. And that's the moment of self-betrayal, because that initial thought was the right thought, right? And that is the crux of mindfulness. Is a lot of times we are using stories from the past or stories of things that we want to do or don't want to do for the reason we're behaving in a way in this moment, rather than just allowing ourselves to be in this moment with this person. And so this was another great podcast if you go through some of my episodes, but Samantha and Ty Mo, they're married, but Samantha works with children that misbehave and their parents to try to bond them, and Ty is a chiropractor. And one of the things that they were talking about is a lot of times people come to them, blaming the child, and the child's blaming the parent. Or in the workplace, you've got two people going at it, and everyone's coming to the manager complaining, right? And his question back is, what is your 100% responsibility? So if I could change the outcome of this, What did I do coming into that conversation, rather than looking outside, that might have changed the outcome of the situation? Doesn't mean that person wasn't right or wrong. All of that's irrelevant. But taking personal responsibility for how we're showing up because of our energy or whatever else is going on in our lives, that's where we come back to that mindfulness and collaboration, that piece of us to balance those stressors that we're having with other people and really figure out what is it that is our responsibility so we can liberate ourselves from all these thoughts and belief systems and stories that cloud our mind every day. This is our monkey mind. These are the things that cloud us from who we are, from actually how we want to show up, how we want to create that energy with the people around us. So what is really important is that we create community, that we have other people supporting us on that journey of who we are and that are able to give us feedback. So when we go through a rebranding process, it is important that we are going out to ask people what it is that they feel when they're around us. And what's really important when we're in those conversations is to not answer, which is really hard, right? Someone's telling you how they think you show up in a meeting, and you're like, well, that's because of this and this and that. Nope, just nothing. You are actually getting yourself present, observing what they have to say, coming back and saying, that's not how I wanted to show up. That's not how I wanted people to perceive me. So what would I need to do from a 100% responsibility perspective to show up different? The other thing is, when we're trying to create who we want to be, a lot of times we just look at a CPA firm partner and we say, I want to be that. That's my goal. But a lot of times what we don't do is look at the process behind what it means to be the CPA firm partner every single day, right? I was listening to this podcast with Jay Shetty, he used to be a monk. And he was talking about that his guru, his monk, had come to speak. And he was like, yes, that's what I want to be. So for 4 years, he went and lived with the monks. And he went to bed at 9 o'clock at night. He had to get up at 2 a.m. every day and meditate. Then 4 a.m. to study. Then 6 a.m. to meditate again. And after 4 years, he's like, nope, don't want to be a monk. Right? I don't want that process. When we're thinking about our career journey or our life journey, it is important not just to look at the outside of that person, but what it takes to be in there. So when I was going through my journey and I was thinking about, God, I gave up music and art and I really miss it, I was like, well, what if I use my accounting skills and I become a band manager, or I go work for Beats, or I go in the music industry and deal with the financials for, rock stars, whatever it is. But I went and did the research to say, would it make me happy or is it the same crap? And what I found was it was really cutthroat, and that wasn't an industry I wanted to be in. So even though it looked great from the outside, I still had work to do. I still had research to do to think about where I wanted to be. And when we go through this process, this is when we get really vulnerable in who we are. That we have to open ourselves up for the feedback, and we have to open ourselves up that maybe some of these dreams we have might just not happen because it really doesn't align to who we are, and being okay with that. But as we grow, we can be more vulnerable with the people around us. And that is growth as far as us as a professional. So I worked at a tech company, and we were working on a new certification process, and the CEO told me, you can do this any way you've ever thought would be a better way to do it. And I was like, oh yeah, I am so excited to go about this. And I had a global team, and so I came up with a completely new way. And I set 120 people around the world to start working on this. And after like 8 months, it was failing. And it was feeling hard because no one had anything to look to. It was brand new. We were innovating. We were changing. And those are the moments that you can't just keep pushing on something.